Welcome back, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. By the time this comes out, I will be holding my newly born baby daughter in my arms, or I'll be very close to it, so I'm unbelievably excited. I'll be updating people when she's finally here, so go follow me on Twitter and Facebook to see that. Anyway, let's get on to the topic of today's video. I know, it's a very ominous title. For good reason. I'm going to tell you about who and what Savathun is, and why she's even more terrifying than the darkness itself. To understand her story, we have to cast ourselves back to very ancient times, millions of years before the events of Destiny 1. It's a long one, so bear with me, it's worth it in the end. Our story begins on a distant world called Fundament, a huge gas giant that had had another planet crash into it at some point in the past, leaving many continents scattered beneath the billowing clouds of the upper atmosphere. Many clans and kingdoms lived on this world, some from a race called the Krill. An incredibly short-lived insectoid race, they believed themselves to be the lowest and weakest things in existence, reaching the end of their life around the age of 10. Around the time of their adulthood, they grow into the caste or morph that they will have for the remainder of their lives. One of these is the mother morph, which lets them live far beyond their normal age. All of this will become important later. The Krill were split up into various different kingdoms, two of which were called the Helium Drinkers and the Osmium Court. The Osmium Court was ruled by a king who had 3 daughters, Orash, Shiro, and Sathona. Each had distinct personalities. Orash was a very curious child, wanting to explore whenever she could. Shiro loved to fight, and would always seek one out at every opportunity. Sathona was cunning, and wished to take on the Mother Morph so she could live past her measly 10-year lifespan and learn more of life. The king eventually started showing signs of insanity, and would always carry a dead, but not quite dead, white worm on his shoulder that he would talk to and take advice from regularly. Eventually, Teox, the children's advisor and the closest thing they had to a queen, not confident in the leadership of the king, his insufficient daughters, and wanting to seize power for herself, sent word to the Helium Drinkers to come and assassinate the Osmium dynasty, leaving Teox to rule as regent in their place. Long story short, the daughters of the Osmium king escaped on a ship, sailed across Fundament, found another highly advanced ship, and used it to explore the depths of the gas giant world. By the time they reached the deep center of the world, they came across the worm gods, ancient, powerful, godlike beings who gave the sisters power and immortality, and in exchange, they would take on the worm gods' children, which require a constant diet of death, and they would need to remain true to their natures. Orash would have to remain ever curious. Shiro would always have to seek out a fight, and Sathona would always have to rely on her cunning. With their newfound power, they rose up through the depths. Orash takes on the King Morph, a new name, Aurex, and together the two sisters and their new brother convert the rest of their species to the worm, or kill them if they resist. From there, the armies of the newly born Hive, led by their great general Jiro, who has taken on the Night Morph and is now Shiva Arath, conquer the rest of the planet, while Sathona, who has taken on the Mother Morph, is now Savathun, and uses her cunning to try to figure out a way to get off the planet. Together with the Worm God's help, they tear open a rift in reality, emerge in orbit around Fundament, and chase after Teox, who has sought shelter and asylum with the species that inhabit Fundament's many moons. Again, cutting a massively long story short here, the new hive wage war on the species known as the Ammonites. They are a highly technologically advanced race, but even more than that, they have a secret weapon. Fundament has 52 moons, but for a while now, it has had 53. The Ammonites are the first race ever recorded to be powered by the Traveler. While they fight hard and even manage to win some battles with the Hive, the Ammonites are eventually defeated. They were crushed so utterly that only in the Books of Sorrow are they even remembered. Using the Ammonites' technology, the Hive leave the moons of Fundament behind and set out to wage war amongst the stars. During the war, Alrix had died and discovered the Ascended Plane after convening with the Worm Gods. When he returned from death, he told his sisters of the place, and that they should all make throne worlds in the Ascended Plane. Savathun called hers the High Coven. As the Hive made their way through the stars, the trio practiced the highest law of the logic that bound all of the new Hive, the sword logic. For 20,000 years, Alrix and his sisters killed each other over and over again, gaining power each time and understanding the sword logic more and more. Eventually, they turned their weapons and abilities on life in the cosmos, wiping out an untold amount of civilizations along the way. As they ravaged multiple worlds, the trio faced an alarming problem. The more powerful they became, the more their wounds would need to feed. And if the day ever came that their wounds couldn't be fed, their wounds would devour them instead. To combat this, Alrix devised a plan. He killed his sisters in the Ascendant Plane, granting them true deaths, and gaining untold power from the act. With that power, he went to the Worm God of Secrets, Akka, and slew him. He pillaged the secrets of communing with the deep, the darkness, from Akka's body, and had an audience with them. And when he returned, he was Oryx, the Taken King. He eventually brought back his sisters through great acts of cunning and war. Once revived, he told them about the tribute system that he had devised, so that their wounds would always be fed, and they would keep on living. This would eventually lead to Savathun doing the same, but we'll get to that a bit later. As the years passed, Savathun would enact her cunning wherever she could. She tried to leave Oryx stranded in the Ascended Plane, tricked Crota into letting Vex invade Oryx's throne world, and even graffitied the Books of Sorrow to sow deception into its pages. Speaking of Vex, when they tried to invade Oryx's throne world, they created a Vex mind called Quoria, Blade Transform, who learned the ways of the sword logic and used it to gain as much power as it could, hoping to understand Oryx's existence and wipe out the Hive for good. It even went as far as simulating the original version of Oryx, Ulrash. Oryx eventually captured Quoria after a great battle near a black hole, and gifted it to Savathun, so that she might study it and the simulation of him that it had produced. Savathun then took a section of her hive and her ships and sailed into the black hole, so that she may grow in power and understanding apart from Oryx and her sister. Shiva Arath did the same, sailing off into the cosmos. This was the last time the three siblings of the Osmium court were together. Savathun didn't like the idea of a tribute line, and wanted to find some other way of satisfying her worm, so she devised a plan. She pushed Ascended Hive who were in danger of letting their worms consume them into the orbit of a black hole, where time passed slowly. They killed things at the normal rate, while the worm's hunger grew sluggish, so Savathun would always have more than enough tribute to feed her own worm. But the worms realised the deception, and simply upped the intake of death they needed to survive. So instead, she used some of that tribute of death to teach Queria hive magic as a computational device to solve unsolvable problems, like the tribute issue, and like navigating a black hole, which she used when she left Oryx to be on her own. She uses that knowledge to carve her throne world into a black hole, or into a world that lies beyond a black hole, like the Awoken homeworld. It's not exactly clear. Even in saying all of this, none of it may be true. All of this information was given to us by Oryx, Savathun, and Dulinkaru, Savathun's daughter. Apart from Oryx, lies and deception are their nature, so we have no idea whether or not this is true. Always take anything relating to Savathun with a pinch of salt. But this brings us to Destiny, and the part she's had to play in the world that we love. Most of what we know of Savathun came from the Taken King expansion in Destiny 1. However, she's been quite active behind the scenes, and coming into Destiny 2, we begin to see evidence of that throughout the system. We see scannables and dialogue here and there mention her, but the most notable of that is of the Savathun song Strike. It's here we see one of her streakers, a thing she uses as an eye to see whatever might be going on around it. And it even says that the Hive are trying to summon something to Titan. In Forsaken, we get to see more mentions of Savathun, and even of Shiva Arath, as we take on the weekly missions to rid the Dreaming City of the Taken influence. With Oryx gone, there should be no more new Taken in the system. And yet, we see a Taken daughter of Shiva Arath. Someone has taken the Taken throne. Only one being is strong enough, and cunning enough, to be able to gain control over the Taken, Savathun. We see even more evidence of her influence and meddling with the Crown of Sorrow raid. Emperor Callus, on his journey through space after being exiled from the Cabal home planet, came across an old Hive war moon that contained a crown of unimaginable power. But, of course, this was a trap laid by Savathun herself. Callus knew of this, and tried to control the crown's power anyway, which is why the raid takes place. The Crown of Sorrow takes control of Galrun, and he becomes subject to the whim of Savathun, and wreaks havoc aboard the Leviathan. We put an end to him, and after doing so, we see the glowing symbol of the Witch Queen on the inside of the crown. We knew she was still around, and that whatever she was planning was beyond our understanding. Of course, in trying to understand her, and failing to do so, we only grant her more power. Even now, just discussing this feeds her ever-growing might. In any case, we must press on. In the latest press release Bungie did, they detailed the next season of Destiny and its next 3 years. One of these expansions, coming in September of 2021, is titled The Witch Queen. The coming struggle with her is just around the corner. But for now, we contend with her over the messages Eris Morn is receiving from the darkness each week. She is trying to prevent us from communing with the darkness, but we're yet to figure out why. While this is going on, something else has happened right under our noses. Something which will only make her more terrifying than before. Take a listen to this. The High Priest knelt before his withered god, mired in the ambivalence of shattered ideology, his faith replaced by the reality of Zol's failure. no wisdom or debased ritual buried in decrepit tomes could restore what was lost, nor was he inclined to attempt such an act. Disillusion swept over. The will of thousands, silenced by light and code. He would have called this an act of heresy once, when the truth had not yet been revealed. There are no gods. There are only chains, and those at either end. Nokris had been ignorant, staring into the sun. For what is divinity but a star that blinds, a statue to be toppled, that it may galvanize the wailing masses who seek power in the death of old things? Gods, broken by pawns, brought low and driven into the mud. Nokris drifted in the heart of winter, at the northern pole of Mars. He lacked the strength to raise what remained frozen beneath the surface. He closed his eyes and reached into the tuckered corners of existence with his mind, searching for remnants of Zol's power, only to find his communion denied by months of disconnected indifference. Through his outreach, he had come to know that Zol lived, burrowed deep and forgotten within the crust of another world. He had grazed the edge of confirmation with his old god, only to feel it wriggle away, apathetic and eager to break ties. Nokris, too weak to fulfill his purpose, was abandoned. The worms sought to be wielded by another, to fill their hands with power as self-justified servitude in the bowels of Io. Despite the many traces of Zol's influence remaining on Mars, none would serve him better than the scrap of worm hide he gripped within his claws. He may be unable to produce the death necessary to feed its appetite and coerce paracausal change from it, but he knew those who could foster the necessary violence. A plan began to form in his mind, whispered from deep recesses he had not explored in many years. He had held the scrap taken from Zol's remains for so long that it had eaten grooves into the bone plating in his hand. With it, he intended to force open that which had always been kept from him by the logic of the sword. He meant to craft his own ascendant gate from the grave corpse legions of his risen brood. Fetid ranks of thrall rotted beneath rime on cracked chitin, encircled him and awaited the ritual. Their refurbished flesh, soulfire kindling. He drew upon the deep, and let the latent tethers clinging to Zol's sloth guide his will, until he could mould reality around it. The bait was set. Agents of the sky were expected, and so they came, with fury and the fuel of death. They did as they were built to do. Obsesque and domineering, they knew no other way but to cleanse that which stood in opposition to their arresting light. Their righteous carnage birthed Nokris's transition, and his snare drew watchful eyes from the taken throne. The sky's vassals stormed the penumbral depths, as they had done so many times before. Their fear of Zol's resurrection drove them forward, like searing irons at their back. Fear had twisted to his purpose, his death an offering that would seal the spell and create a pinprick piercing through which his soul could slip into the ascendant plane. But guile was the language of a more ancient player. She had taken notice of his cunning. She directed Nokris away from his destination, and instead to wash upon the shores of her court. As his vision cleared, his eyes strained to see the taken queen, cloaked in the midnight glory of an event horizon. A singularity throne perverted the space before him. The Queen of Lies, wrapped in distortion and gravitational lensing, sat within its inestimable depth. Her voice was distant, redshift discord, and all around him. Her presence, the realm itself, boundless and willing to take. Savathun's words spewed forth.
Breaker of pacts, a heretic stands here. What denial has yet to be given that you would return to me?
I fed the worm, and still it faltered, he said.
Nokris stared directly into the empty point of space, continually caving in on its form. He could barely define her silhouette within the wrap.
To falter is its nature,
Savathun's words were tinged with curiosity.
though not by your officious methods.
Nokris preened the flesh of his face back to display a skeletal smile.
The sword bears no truth. The worms are gods of thin ambition and reign vast nothing.
Brave words in this place. Do you not think that they are watching?
Nokris bowed his head for the first time since he was drawn here.
The queen is clever. You do not share my father's single-minded ambition, nor my brother's taste for glory.
You wish to serve me.
The thin image twitched within the black-lit accretion glow.
My life is spent. Servitude to those who cast me away. Our blood is all that remains of the old pact.
Then let us make use of each other.
Nokris raised his gaze.
What use would I be to a god?
No gods.
He nodded.
So it has always been.
Savathun's voice converged onto him from every direction.
You, a usurper. The first tug at the end of the chain.
To act as distraction or await slaughter?
Nokris' voice sunk with disappointment.
No, as a thorn. You have circumvented the deep through forbidden sacrament. So you shall continue. The deep fears me, as we feared you. Ignorance keeps, knowledge usurps. In this you have found purpose in my court.
The high priest's shoulders straightened.
You feared me.
In a younger time, intents were narrower. I see your value, as we should all have then. All who denied you, blinded by the sword, let them fall away as grains from the scythe.
I am the implement.
You are the mechanism by which we sever their chain.
Savathun's voice filled his skull with silken promise.
Teach me your necromancies, usurper of the ordered way, so that together we may circumvent the anchored logic that drops us into the depths. Serve as foil to scatter the pieces of their grand game across the cosmos.
As soul did for my heart, I offer a trade. Knowledge for knowledge. Grant me sight into the dreaming mind's talent, and I will teach you what you ask.
A rebellious bargain. In the midst of dark tides. It is bound. Under my symbol and reborn, made in my image. Our bargain will set new beginnings in motion.
The masters convene here?
Concern dripped from Nokris' words.
Do we mean to move against them?
Not so directly. Arrival is imminent. A shadow will reach out and make itself known.
I am to obscure the connection.
Where sky meets deep, you shall be the screen that sows dissonance. And for it, we will walk unhindered by the parasitic inclinations of those who believe themselves mighty.
Nocris saw the scheme.
The will of many bend to our hand.
No longer do they draw upon us.
Freedom. They are beset against each other. We walk the space in between.
An accord is struck.
Speak my name.
Savathun, subjugant to none, sword breaker and queen to the taken throne.
To me you are bonded. Go forth and enact my will.
Nocris was cast out of Savathun's court as suddenly as he had been ripped into her presence. He drifted in the ascendant plane, no longer directionless. Behind him, the court faded, and its shimmering illusion fell like curtains upon a stage. The dark core of the singularity wavered. Sunken within its gravitational well was a lone thrall and no other. Its death spread over eons of deterioration. Mouth agape to utter words at the taking Queen's whim as Patsy, and nothing more. Her presence had been but a mirage, soaked and sold by the lie of her mouthpiece puppet, to whom Nocris unknowingly spoke. In truth, only a thrall stood within the orbit of the singularity, for the Queen would not be so foolish to reveal herself. Savathun looked upon her charlatan court from distant transcendent hollows. Her nascent alliance had produced power twinfold, in that of Nocris's devotion, as well as his deception through her mouthpiece thrall positioned within the singularity. She breathed in his desperate agreement and prepared for the struggle to come.
So there's a lot to unpack here, but we'll stick to the main points. Nocris has found his way into the Ascendant Plane, using his own death at our hands as the catalyst for the journey. He seems to arrive at Savathun's court, being pulled there by some unseen force. But we find out later that she has crafted this yet again to deceive any who wander onto those shores. Being adrift, without the main source of his power, Nocris was in search of something greater, and so he found his aunt, the Taking Queen herself. Side note, for those who don't know, Oryx had more children than just Crota and his two Deathsinger daughters, Ur-Hanuk and Ur-Halak. He also had a second son, Nocris, whose use of necromancy was an act of extreme blasphemy against the sword logic, and made Oryx cast him out from the hive, destroying every trace of him that existed, except for a lone statue in Oryx's dreadnought. This is where things get even more terrifying. Nocris enters into a bargain with Savathun, trading his knowledge and skill of necromancy for insight into the Dreaming Mind's talent. We don't know what that is as of yet. It could be referencing Riven, but perhaps not. At any rate, Savathun now knows the secrets of necromancy, another tool in her arsenal, and you can be sure she will wield that and so much more to terrifying effect. Deceptive as she is, we can assume that she has made a bold claim here. She's seeking a way to become separate from the worm gods and the darkness, even almost declaring her own personal war on it. She has entered the grand game, even if she only seeks to disrupt it as best she can. All that aside, keep in mind that anything she says, anything written or spoken about her, could very well be lies. To understand her is to destroy her, but to be deceived by her is to give her power. And at the moment, her power is growing immensely as each day passes. And that's it. Bit of a different take on this video. There's a lot happening this season, so I'll be grinding out a steady stream of videos as much as I can. Speaking of, I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, liking and commenting would really help me out, and help the video reach more people. Subscribing would also be amazing, and you can always hit the notification bell to be notified whenever I post something new. I really do appreciate it. Of course, I just appreciate the fact that you viewed it to begin with. Anyway, I'm the Ice Warrior 209, and I'll catch you all next time.